Well, we're approaching the end of the crazy festive period in the EFL Championship, and I think we'll all agree after New Year's Day the scorelines are getting less and less predictable. Certainly, we'll see that in a recap in a moment, but for now, we're here to look ahead to Matchweek 26, which takes place over Saturday, Sunday, and Monday, and we will go and preview and predict all 12 matches. Encourage you to do the same down in the comments below. If you beat or match my overall scoring predictions, you will get a shout out in the next recap, which will be here next Sunday when we look ahead to 3 rearranged midweek fixtures. And then, of course, we're back to normal with loads of games from mid-January after the FA Cup third round. Before we go and get into any of that, though, let's have a quick recap of what happened on New Year's Day. All 12 fixtures were played, and it was a very tough week to call, partly because there were a lot of surprises. Burnley struggling at home to Stoke, Oxford winning away at Millwall, no new manager bounce for Alex Neil, but also because the wins that were there were often by bizarre scorelines. So my 5 points came for QPR's home win, as well as home wins for Pompey, for Sheffield Wednesday and West Brom, all scoring goals galore, and then Middlesbrough nicked to 1-0 at Hull to give me a 5th point in the early evening kickoff. Now, I was a bit worried at that point, but it was a low-scoring week all the way round. I'm still in joint 7th place for this week, and nobody made double figures. Level with me on 5 were Brian and Bandit, then one above on 6, 3 more of you, this guy, Peter and Etienne. In joint 2nd place, we've got Gordon and Tim on 7, and then out in front on 9 points on his own is Steve, who wins the match day thanks to 2 Championship's favourite scorelines for the Cardiff and for the Leeds fixtures at home. So well done to you, you win match day 25, but now we move on to match week 26, and we start with an early kickoff in the Lancashire derby, which is Blackburn Rovers versus Burnley. Both sides up in that playoff and promotion race. Burnley sneaking into 2nd place with a draw at home to Stoke, a disappointing day, but they're staying consistent, and my God, they're so good defensively. Still in single figures for goals conceded, just 9 in 25 matches. But while that is the case, they are lacking a little bit going forward. We've mentioned this a few times. We saw it against Derby. We've seen it against Stoke. There are 3 or 4 other examples where they've just not been able to break teams down that come and sit 10 behind the ball. Hannibal obviously got sent off late on, a little bit of stupidity from him. But it was a pretty decent point for them in the end because Sheffield United lost and they move into the top 2. Loads of opportunities, loads of possession. Didn't create too much clear cut. And actually, you could argue Stoke had the best chance of the game. But in the end, Burnley keep the unbeaten run going and keep that brilliant defensive record. They could do with adding a bit of firepower in January, though. For Blackburn, a 1-1 draw away at Leeds. A bit of a crazy finish to that game, wasn't it? Conceded the penalty and the goal in the 88th minute. Went straight up the other end and got one a minute later. Really important point for them. And you've got to give John Eustace credit. They sat behind the ball. They frustrated Leeds. It's horrible to watch at times. But John Eustace's job is to maximise what he can out of the group of players he's got. I go all the way back to his first game in charge of Birmingham at Luton Town. And I remember telling you, they got time wasting warnings in the 15th minute. And it was the same tactic here. It's slowing the game down. It's stopping Leeds from getting momentum. But that's probably the only way they can get the results. And in fairness to them, they picked one up and they were bounced back from that disappointment against Hull. It is 4 without a win. But when you consider they played Sunderland, Leeds and gone away to Millwall in that spell, I don't think it's a terrible run. This game, going to be a lot tougher to call. They are at home, so they're normally pretty strong there. That whole game's maybe throwing me. Will Burnley come out? Will they play on the counter? You never know what you're going to get in a derby game. I'd bank on there probably being a red card, although Hannibal would have been one of the big candidates. He's not going to be playing now. I'm going to go... Do you know what? I think Burnley are a little toothless in front of goal, so I'm going to stick with Blackburn to bounce back at home and win this one by 1-0. Next up is the battle of the new manager versus the managerless. As it stands, it is Stoke City versus Plymouth Argyle. Plymouth, of course, sat Wayne Rooney just hours after we released our last one. And of course, that did change the game a little against Bristol City. A 2-2 draw there with a last-minute equaliser. And to be fair, they came back from behind twice and they've always been competitive at home. But there is no doubt in that there was still far too open defensively and Bristol City had the best chances of that match. And on another day, Plymouth could have lost by 3 or 4, let's be brutally honest. But a point on the board keeps them just about in touching distance as they look for a new manager. Whereas Stoke City have found theirs, and it is yet another proven championship manager. I know we've talked about it in the manager special up in the eye above. After Narcy Palak and that experiment that didn't quite work, they've gone back to the tried and trusted, of which many have not succeeded at Stoke. But crucially, we've got a manager instead of a head coach in Mark Robins. And this game at first, on paper, is one of the easiest in the Championship because Plymouth defensively, particularly away from home, an absolute mess. Don't score goals on the road either. And after Stoke got a creditable 0-0 against Burnley, backs to the wall 1-0 win against Sunderland. It wasn't brilliant to watch. It wasn't exciting. But fair play to Ryan Shawcross. He made them hard to beat. Something Narcy Palak didn't do. It's just whether they can add that attacking sprinkle under Mark Robins. It's another one that sort of falls into that home banker category. You think at home, first game in charge, it's going to go well. But we made that mistake with Millwall Oxford. And I'm going to make the mistake again. I think Stoke are going to get immediate response. Mark Robins is a motivator. He'll get the best out of them on this day. And Plymouth are awful at the back. So I'm going to go for Stoke to win, but maybe to let in a sloppy goal. 3-1 for Stoke City. The final early kickoff is in South Wales. And this could be, on paper, the most interesting one of the weekend. Purely for off-the-pitch reasons. Because it is Swansea City versus West Bromwich Albion. Swansea City currently managed by Luke Williams, who is the favourite for the West Brom job, and if we're to believe reports, they have asked and approached to speak to him. Swansea, maybe that showed, and he was asked questions about it in a 4-0 defeat at Portsmouth, a Swansea side that have been pretty hard to beat for the most point this year. Well, that was a dismal display. 2 goals conceded in quick succession before the half-hour mark, and after that, they never looked like getting into it. Yes, Portsmouth were good, but Swansea were poor. They did their usual, they dominated the ball. They did have a couple of good chances, but overall, it was a really poor defensive display from them. Luke Williams, well, what's going to happen with this weekend? I wonder if he ends up in charge of neither. Because if West Brom won him, they'll want it sorted before this one. They beat Preston by 3-1. And actually, got to give credit to Chris Brunt and the interim team there. One of their most impressive attacking performances of the season. They were 3-0 up at half-time. Madger got a couple. Callum Stiles scoring as well. And while they didn't again create that 20-25, they're not that side that just go and have chances galore. They generally create very good chances, and in that match deservedly got the victory. West Brom are a very solid side for the most part, but the defensive record has been a little less impressive in the last 5, where they've let in 6 goals. Not disastrous, but not what we expect from West Brom. For Swansea, the defensive record, it had improved those last 2 home games, but on the road, it's starting to look fragile. So at home, I don't think they'll concede as many. I think West Brom will do the job here. I'm going to go for the visitors to win by 1-0. But what happens with the manager between now, as I'm recording on Thursday morning, and Saturday, is probably going to play a large factor in the result here. Let's move on to the 3 p.m. kickoffs, starting at Ashton Gate with Bristol City versus Derby County. Bristol City, we mentioned, after those 2 good victories at home, held at Plymouth Argyle. The late goal curse has struck again. I praised them for not being as bad at it this season, and then they went and did it the very next game. If we're being honest, they should have put the game to bed well before that. They had 3 or 4 really glorious opportunities. So overall, I think they'll say, look, they won a scrappy game against Luton, and they performed really well twice against sides near the bottom. Maybe just a slight frustration they didn't pick up 2 more points. For Derby, it was probably one of their worst defensive displays away at Sheffield Wednesday. A really poor one as they conceded 4. Obviously, a few freak goals in there. Josh Windass scoring from the halfway line. Doesn't happen every match, does it? They did show a little bit of spirit late on. They didn't lie down. They tried to get back into the game. And they have looked a threat on the counter away from home at times this season. On another day, it could have been a draw. But for all of the possession and for all of the chances, Sheffield Wednesday had the best ones and carved them open a little bit too easily. We know away from home, Derby aren't great at all. They really struggle to pick up points on the road. And Bristol City have generally been better recently, but they're such a nightmare to predict. Can Derby go and frustrate them as they did away at Burnley, as they almost did for large parts at Luton as well? Or will Bristol City put them to the sword? I'm going to go for Bristol City to edge it just. There was a big part of me that wanted to go for 1-1 here. I'm going to go for Bristol City to nick it. I'm trusting them by 2-1. As we move on to East v West in Yorkshire, it is Hull City versus Leeds United. Let's start with Leeds, who were really frustrated by Blackburn, and you could see the frustration getting them towards the end. And as they scored that penalty, there was a huge sigh of relief in the stadium. Leeds United thought they'd won the game. And then you're most vulnerable when you score, aren't you? That was proven there as they conceded the equaliser a minute later. It's a real sucker punch for them because Blackburn Rovers came for a point, and in the end, after taking the lead, they gifted it away, which would be so, so frustrating. They keep the unbeaten run going, and as we mentioned, Blackburn are a very good side this year, so they get a point and stay top of the league, given the fact that none of the top three won. In a grand scheme of things, it's not a disaster, but Leeds would have looked at that and went, oh, we could have just pulled away there. For Hull City, a 1-0 defeat at home to Middlesbrough, really struggling to open up now, and something we mentioned when Liam Rosenior changed to Tim Walter and now Tim Walter to Ruben Selles is the owner wanted that style of football that Tim Walter brought, but now he's gone back to a manager who's a less good version of what Liam Rosenior was doing before, where he had them up in 7th. And now Hull are at risk of going back down to League One near that relegation battle. Yes, it took till the 93rd minute to concede the winner against Borough, but he didn't have a shot on target at home. And Borough, for all of the chances they create, whether they take them or not in each game, they are fairly open defensively at times. They've conceded over 30 goals, the most of the top 7, and Hull couldn't muster a shot on target. They didn't have much of the ball. It was like Middlesbrough were at home against them, trying to break them down. A very disappointing day for Hull City, and that's 3 1-0s they've been involved in a row, whether that's home or away. Yes, as a new manager, you want to try and make your team more solid, but I'm not sure how long he's going to last under the current ownership if he doesn't play more attractive football here. We saw that with Liam Rosenior. 7th wasn't enough. For this game, I think it's going to be forced to be a little bit more open because I don't think Hull are solid enough defensively to stop Leeds. And if Leeds score a relatively early goal, they'll have to come out at home and try and get a point. On this occasion, I'm going to go for Leeds to win, perhaps not convincingly, but I am going to trust them to get the job done on the road. I'm going to go for Leeds to win at Hull by 2-1. As next up, we move on to the side that beat Hull City on New Year's Day. It is Middlesbrough at home to Cardiff City. Cardiff, fair play to them, 4 points in their last 2 games, a 1-1 draw at home to Coventry. They were really let down though by Callum Robinson, and he's done this a few times during his Cardiff career. He has a couple of games where he looks like the hero, he gets into a bit of form, and he just does something stupid. He's done it a few times here, and in the end, you've got to be fair to Cardiff. They did well to hang on for a point against Coventry. So a really decent result on festive period for them, but they have lost one of their key attacking threats now on the counter going to Borough. The home side are doing their usual, the mix of goals conceded and scored, the mix of defensively brilliant and awful, a 0-0 and a late 1-0 win away at Hull City, follow 2 3-all draws in succession. They just can't be consistent at both ends of the pitch, and while they've scored tons of goals this season, in fact they are the second highest scorers in the division after Leeds, they're coming in clusters and in certain games rather than consistently across the season. It's the reason they're in 5th rather than fighting for 2nd, 3rd and 4th. So for this game, I am going to go for Borough to win. I don't think Cardiff are good enough to stop them. I don't think they're going to have much of an attacking threat in this game. And while they have started scoring a few goals recently, a lot of that was Callum Robinson. So I'm going to go for Middlesbrough to win comfortably at the Riverside by 2-0. But we know there's another date where they could get frustrated and it'll end up 0-0. Let's move into the second half with Norwich City versus Coventry City. Norwich nicked a 1-0 win away at Luton in the second half. A bit of an ironic game, really, because the first half, Norwich were the better side without creating anything too clear-cut. Second half, Luton were the better side without creating anything too clear-cut. Yes, Luton probably should have had a penalty. We'll get to that a bit later on. But in the end, 0-0 would have been a fair score. Neither side did much to win it, but Nunes produced the moment. Norwich City nicked the win. And to be fair, defensively, Luton haven't been great. So a really good win for Norwich because Luton have still been picking up points at home. And that just about keeps them in the outskirts of that playoff mix. Whereas for Coventry, as we mentioned a minute ago, probably a frustrating day after equalising against Cardiff and then the home side going down to 10 men. To not be able to break them down second half will have been frustrating. But we've mentioned it before. Coventry are probably a more threatening side on the counter with the players they've got. Like to have space in behind to run into. And without that, with Cardiff sitting deep, was a little bit difficult for them. But another point on the board, they're moving away from that bottom end of the table. And on this occasion, I just think Norwich will be too good at home. I know they had that blip against Burnley, but it's their only defeat in about 13, 14 months. Let's go for Norwich City to win this one. Coventry were awful away at Portsmouth. When they concede, they do fall away. I'm going to go for 3-1 Norwich City at home to Coventry. As we move on to a big game in the bottom half of the table, two sides looking to push away from that relegation pack. It is Preston North End versus Oxford United. What a start for Gary Rowett. 3 wins in a row, probably most pleasingly though, this one at his old club Millwall. A 1-0 victory, nullified the new manager bounce, which is so strong in the Championship. And yet again, a player popping up with a moment of magic in Ruben Rodriguez, and Oxford have got that. While they haven't on paper got the biggest, strongest squad in the division, they've got 4 or 5 attacking players that can do something to win a game or spark a moment of magic. Millwall had more of the game, they had more of the asserted pressure in the match, but Oxford did really well at preventing set pieces, preventing the threat from wide areas, and actually probably had the best couple of chances of the game on the break. In the end, a 1-0 victory to make it 3 in a row to start for Gary Rowett. Starting to look like a very good decision, isn't it? We were a little bit surprised about Des Buckingham going. He was doing a good job, but Gary Rowett is a great replacement and he's proving his worth yet again. For Preston, back-to-back home wins followed up by a 3-1 defeat at West Brom where, let's be honest, they were second best. West Brom were very good. Preston surprisingly had more of the ball and they are starting to look a better side and have more attacking intent under Paul Heckingbottom, but I still feel he's going to need a bit of support in January. They're going to turn some of those draws into victories in particular. That one away at West Brom is not going to define many teams' season. This is where it matters. They won at home to Hull. They won at home to Sheffield Wednesday. Can they do the same against Oxford? I think they can. I know Oxford might have that confidence from finally getting an away win there, but I think it's going to be back down to earth in this one. I don't think it's going to be the thriller of the weekend, but I do think Preston will nick it. 1-0 to the home side. Both managers doing decent jobs there. Let's move on to Sheffield Wednesday versus Millwall. Sheffield Wednesday, a brilliant victory against Derby, a very entertaining game. Josh Windass obviously scoring the most notable goal from the halfway line, probably just inside his own half, he would say. But a really strange game, really. Derby had a lot of the ball against Wednesday, who played largely off the counter, but looks a real threat. They've got that pace and that quality in wide areas. They've got the guile of people like Bannon and Windass who can produce those moments. The only thing that will be concerning Danny Roll is defensively, they do look a little bit open at the minute. That's 8 conceded in their last 3. Borough, Preston and Derby, particularly the last 2, not sides you would expect to be carving teams open at Championship level. They'll be looking to find a bit more solidity in a game against a side that you would expect to set up a bit more cautiously. Alex Neil didn't have the dream start. It was a really frustrating day at home to Oxford. More of the game and territory. They huffed and puffed without really creating too much. And Oxford in the end created the best couple of chances, but to gift the promoted side their first away win of the season, it's going to be a really annoying day for them. It's early days though, I'm sure Millwall will get it right. Will they get it right for this one though? It's another one of those games that a lot of people are going to go for 1-1. I'm going to go for Wednesday to nick it. You've got to be fair to them. They're scoring goals galore at the moment. Since that game against Blackburn where they were really frustrated at home, which could happen in this one, you could see it. They have scored 13 goals in their last 5. So I'm going to go for Sheffield Wednesday by 2-1. I'm not sure, but I'm confident with that one. The final kickoff on Saturday afternoon is Watford versus Sheffield United. A big game between two sides that have had, well, a frustrating week really. Watford with back-to-back defeats against sides in the bottom half of the table. Obviously that shock home defeat against Cardiff, but then a really poor performance against QPR. They were opened up very easily. They didn't defend the box well at all. And while QPR didn't create bundles of chances in that game, they looked like scoring every time they had one. Watford again is still a threat on the break, but defensively away from home, it's just chalk and cheese to what they've been at home most of the season, albeit they're now on a longer run without a clean sheet. For Sheffield United, their defensive record is also suffering. We've got to bear in mind that they've got a lot of players out and they've played 3 of the toughest sides in the division over this period. They've played West Brom, Burnley, Sunderland, all in the top 6. Yes, they'll be annoyed they've only picked up 1 point, but it's hardly a disaster, is it? The problem is, if you take out that Cardiff game for Watford, they're going away to a side that are pretty much invincible at home. It's very difficult to get a win at Vicarage Road. It's very difficult to nullify the home team. And while Sheffield United have had a lot of clean sheets this season, they are just starting to show fragilities against the top side. So I'm not sure where to go with this one. And based on the fact that I've not put one in all day, I feel I have to before the show's up. I think this is probably my safest prediction for it. I'm going to go for the Championship's favourite scoreline, 1 apiece to finish Saturday at Vicarage Road. Let's move on to the Sunday fixture. One hell of a trip. Why it's been moved to Sunday afternoon, I get the TV and that, but come on. This is a joke for the fans. It is Sunderland versus Portsmouth, 3 p.m. on Sunday. Sunderland got a very good victory against Sheffield United last time out to end what has been a frustrating festive period in style. A really good result for them. Gets them back in that mix, just 5 off the top. None of the top 3 winning, so Sunderland taking full advantage. And while they gave up a lot of the ball, they played on the counter. It's a Sunderland team that now looks a lot more like they did under Tony Mowbray rather than a disastrous spell in between, perhaps with a slight addition of defensive solidity, albeit that's partly due to having defenders fit. But overall, a really good result for Sunderland, a really important one if they want to stay in that mix. But what about Portsmouth? Performance on New Year's Day, surely. A 4-0 thrashing of Swansea City, a really good result. They gave up the ball again. We're seeing it a lot more now. We're starting to trend back towards sides without possession, dominating games and getting results. Yes, Swansea had some good chances. Pompey are still very open at the back, even at home. However, they looked a real threat on the counter, and at home they're starting to score goals. Colby Bishop being back makes such a difference, and it brings the best out of those wide players as well. We've seen it with the likes of Lang and Murphy in recent weeks. The goals are starting to flow, but on the road, they've taken a few hammerings. At Bristol City and at Derby, they were awful. Against Watford, they lost in the last minute. Are they going to try and frustrate a top team? Or are they going to come out and get caught like they did against Derby and Bristol City? I'm going to go somewhere in between the two. I think Sunderland will win this game. Pompey just don't look like winning on the road. I'm going to go for 2-0 because I think Pompey will try and set up not to be beat. I don't think Sunderland will give up much on the counter. 2-0 to the home side there. And then we move on to Monday night, and thankfully this is the last game because I don't have to be grumpy throughout the episode then. It is QPR versus Luton Town. Let's just start with Luton. Sorry, QPR fans. It had been 9 away defeats in a row, but the home form was still going. Now that's starting to dwindle as well. Luton just 3 points off the relegation zone, conceded 42 goals now, second worst in the division. And against Norwich, it was just such a frustrating day. Yes, should have had a Stonewall penalty second half, but these things happen in the Championship. And while it wasn't any clear-cut chances opened up against Norwich, and defensively, overall, we've looked better in the 3 games over the festive period. It's just the ease at which people can get in, that throwing the bodies on the line, that closing down with intent is just sort of dropped. And that's probably the best way to sum up Luton this year. The intensity's just dropped 10%, and Luton aren't a good enough team man for man, whether it's Premier League, Championship or League One, that they can afford to do that, and it's showing. Of course, the centre-half's been added at the start of the January window. I think we're going to start to see the new players bedded in soon. My worry is with Luton where they are, and with 2 weeks off of league fixtures after Monday, if they don't get the result, as much as I'm Rob Edwards in, I fear that that might be the point where the trigger's pulled, because all the teams around are doing so, and I do worry that that's going to be the case. So hopefully Luton can end the away hoodoo. They've had some good days at QPR in recent seasons, particularly the year they were promoted. But they've also had a couple of stinkers as well. And I can't predict anything other than this being one, because QPR, much better at home recently. A really good win against Watford by 3-1. Looked a real threat with balls into the box. Beat Preston at home the game before and Oxford the one before that. QPR at home are starting to look a very good side. Marty Cifuentes they stuck with, and now they're pulling up the table. And I'm going to go for QPR to win this as well, because you can't back Luton to get points on the road at the minute. I'm going for Queen's Park Rangers by 2-1. So with that out of the way, let's have a quick recap of what I have gone for in this weekend's predictions. My big scorers at home are both Stoke City and Norwich City, who I'm predicting to win by 3-1 respectively. I've gone for my club Luton Town to drop further away on Monday night with a 2-1 defeat at QPR. And crucially, at the top of the table, if I've got this right, it's going to be a great weekend for both Leeds and Sunderland. I've gone for those two to win, with Burnley and Sheffield United slipping up. Those are just my predictions for Matchweek 26 though. Do you agree or disagree? Let me know in the comments below and give me your predictions for this weekend's action. If you beat or match my overall score, you will get a shout out in a recap when we look ahead to the 3 rearranged midweek games. We'll be back a week on Sunday for that. In the meantime, I'm sure there's going to be 1 or 2 manager specials, particularly with West Brom and Plymouth looking for a new boss at the moment. And if you haven't seen the ones over recent days, Millwall, Oxford and Stoke over the last week, you can find them all in a playlist up in the eye above. But thank you very much for watching and joining as always. I do appreciate it massively. A very happy new year. I hope 2025 is good to you. We'll see you again very soon as the manager specials continue to come thick and fast.